Well, friends, welcome back to this last in a special series from the Shandong Society's conference in New York City. I've got a little bit more of a conversation with Dr. Yu here for you that I hope you will find interesting. Now, I know I promised y'all that I'd have some conversations with participants from the conference. You know, Chinese medicine can do a lot of things. Apparently, it cannot bend time. So, given the constraints of time, I unfortunately did not have time to bring you some comments and thoughts from the participants. I guess y'all are just going to have to come to this next year for yourself and listen to it. And thank you to the Shandong Society for having Qiological come out. It's been a wonderful way to spend the weekend. Learned a lot. And here's our last little bit of conversation with Dr. Yu. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. All the sponsors here provide helpful products or services that you'll find beneficial in your clinical work. Want to get better at treating concussions and other neurological conditions? Clayton Shu has some innovative methods. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. Later in the show, Jane offers you helpful suggestions on how to raise your rates, and Golden Flower, Chinese Herbs, shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Ever found yourself listening to a Qiological conversation and thinking, wow, I needed to hear that? Yeah, me too. And I never know when I'm going to hear a guest say something that stops my world and reboots it with a larger perspective. If these conversations have ever helped you to feel more grounded, more inspired, or just less alone in this strange and wonderful work we do, consider becoming a member or supporting the podcast with a bit of tithing to the donation jar. It helps keep the lights on here at the Qiological Sound and Motion Lab so that we can bring you these conversations every Tuesday morning. You'll find all the details at qiological.com. Thanks for listening and for being a part of this.
Hey there, I'm Cameron Jafari, an acupuncturist from Los Angeles. So I started learning nanopuncture from Dr. Clayton Shu because I was facing these complex neurological conditions like stroke and MS in my clinic, and I just felt like I lacked a solid process to treat them. Brain-related issues always felt like a whole different animal, and I was looking for a clinical system that worked and could guide me through them. So after attending my first nanopuncture seminar, I was able to apply the process pretty quickly and with pretty amazing results. I remember the first stroke patient I saw afterwards was a guy who had had a stroke 2 years back, and he couldn't talk at all. And after a few treatments, he started saying a few words. And a few treatments after that, he could actually have conversations. It was pretty incredible. So this is why I feel like nanopuncture is the future of acupuncture neurology. And you can be a part of that. Their next seminar is on treating concussions and is being co-taught by both Dr. Shu and Dr. Ayla Wolf in New York City on April 26th and 27th. To learn more, visit nanopunctureseminars.com.
So first thing he said was that he's never used this idea clinically in his practice and his experience ever of for example, just one example of the opening, the pivot, and the closing. Like he doesn't see the clinical meaning in that sort of thing. And that there's a lot, I think off when we hadn't turned the mic back on, he said he had the similar problem we do. He's like, a lot of this Chinese medicine theory for a long time when he was younger, he's like, how do I figure this out? And then as he got more experience, he's like, a lot of this stuff is, what does it mean? Doesn't help me in the clinic. On the other hand, he said he does use this sort of qi transformation idea of what we just talked about, the 6 channels and the, I have to remember them all in order now, but some of them from looking and approaching their treatment from the root, some from the branch, and some from the middle, right? And the middle being, for example, back to Yangming, being Tai-Yin. So what he just said was Tai-Yin is the ground floor of Yangming problems. And so once you treat those, always there in the background is how's the spleen going to respond, and how's the, don't overdo it with those cold medicinals. They're appropriate, you use them, but back there, the spleen's going, okay, I can handle a little bit of this. He didn't say this is my wording, but just be careful, because once you start beating on Yangming, I'm going to take some of the punches. And that's part of what that means. So he finds that useful in considering how he approaches a treatment. So back to the main point being that here's an experienced doctor. 老师，你看病多少年
？48年。如果我真正的看，从非正式的看，要1968年到现在51年。
Okay, so I just asked him how long he's been, because I wanted to clarify. Here's a doctor who's been seeing patients, he said, depending on how you calculate it, from somewhere from 48 to 51 years. And if you didn't gather this from the walk along the river, in talking to Dr. Yu and reading other things he's written, this man can quote not just the major classics, but books that are written that don't get talked about a lot. Of course, obviously, even in America, but even in China, that this guy has a lot of clinical experience, wrote a tiny book full of valuable things. He knows these books, And so he's somebody who's saying to you, there's a lot of this theory that doesn't either make sense or don't know how to use it in clinic. He's open-minded. He's still trying to think about some of it and other stuff. I imagine. I didn't ask him the specific question. He's throwing it away, like, forget that. So I think that's meaningful.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that I use to keep my practice running smoothly. So let's talk about something that can be a little bit uncomfortable: raising your fees. I know, this is something that might feel awkward, but it doesn't have to. With a bit of planning and care, you can handle it in a way that feels right for you and your patients. One tip: give yourself at least 2 months to prepare. This gives you time to get comfortable with the change and let your patients know what's happening. You can share the news through emails, booking reminders, or even just a friendly little sign in your clinic, and avoid over-apologizing. Instead, keep it straightforward and matter of fact. Keeping things consistent across the ways that you communicate can really help avoid confusion. Fee increases aren't always easy, but you're not on your own here. For more tips and ideas on how to communicate these changes with confidence, check out frontdesk.chain.app and look for the article, How to Tell Your Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Oh, and one last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. There was something else that I heard Dr. Yu say about sometimes people with not as much clinical experience really get involved in the theory, and you can sort of get lost in the theory, whereas sometimes people with lots of clinical experience, they don't rely so much on the theory as they do on the work that they've done and the results that they've gotten, and they know that this does this and this does that. And then later, if you want to put it into a framework, well, here's a framework, I can stick it in. But these are two different processes. One is trying to take an idea and make it fit reality, and the other is taking reality and going, okay, which of these ideas does it sort of fit into?
And I agree with you, and I would say that some of the theory is useful because it's helped guide the clinic, and they can do that either readily or that through a bit more time figure out how that it is meaningful. And this problem exists today where you'll find people who have written very beautiful books about all sorts of things, and then you come to find out, well, they're in the clinic, they're not that great. There's I don't want to mention any names or anything, but a doctor who's very well known to be good in Shanghai Lun, but then you hear his clinical results are so-so, but the theory he's got down and everything like that perfectly. And that's what some people end up doing is, I'm not so good at clinic, I can play with these theories. Maybe there's people who do both well, but as an example, Hu-Shi Shu, he's somebody who changed some of the ideas and fit them into his own thing. I think he did a good job in it. I think he has very good clinical value, but he had to change things a little bit of the 6-channel things and what, channel this formula treats in order to make it make more sense for him. And I would say we could just use that as an example of not just casually changing things to fit your reality, but, how do you understand something? What makes sense to you? And if it's logical within its own thought process, that's valid, and more importantly, if it's useful in the clinic.
Well, I know for myself as a somewhat mentally lazy practitioner, I like it when I can come across a theory and I go, oh, this kind of explains a lot of things, but the clinical reality is not that. Mm-hmm. And one of the big takeaways that I've gotten from our conversation here today, I keep coming back to this idea of pivot. And this is one of the beautiful things about the Shanghan Lun and really thinking about, the Liu Jing, these 6 confirmations. Things can go from here to there. It's not always in the same sequence, but the idea that something can shift from this to that. And when it does make a shift, let's say it goes from Taiyang to Xiaoyin, right? That means one thing. Whereas if it goes from Taiyang to Yangming, well, that's a different process. And each of those would bring up some different ideas for how we would treat it clinically. And, in terms of the theory, well, we can kind of make up a story in a way about that.
Well, I'm certainly not one of these people who's memorized the Shanghan Lun, so I might be wrong, but I don't.
Better get on it.
I don't think that Jiang Zhongjing used the term like Xiaoyang as the pivot. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, I think we can all agree that he doesn't have a lot of explicit theory in his book. It's very much, here's a presentation. And usually, I shouldn't say usually, but there's certainly cases when something changes from one channel or confirmation to another, it's because some doctors come in and gave a mistreatment. And the meaning from that is when you purge or when you induce vomiting or something, it tends to damage fluids. It tends to damage yang qi. It tends to do that. And it's not a Xiaoyang will change to Yangming or Xiaoyang will change to anything else. It's if you do this, it could change to that. Less so than it's a natural progression per se, although that's included in the background. So anyway, my point, it's a book about mistreatment and what happens and the tendencies that happen when you do that.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection. Understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit, that is where Golden Flower Chinese Herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. Along with the different aspects of the human physiology that we should be considering, because while we might be trying to fix one thing, for example, beautiful example, Yangming, we're fixing the Yangming problem, be careful about that ground floor, which is the Taiyin, because they're connected, and while you're doing good things for the Yangming, don't forget the Taiyin. And I suspect this is true for lots of other situations as well, that there's something underneath it or there's something connected to it. And don't just look at what's in front of you now, but consider what else is connected and where it might go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just say as an example that I think there's a certain physiology that we all share. So that's why Zhang Zhongjing could say, if you have this condition and you purge, this might, he didn't say might, he said this will happen. I think this might likely to happen because when you purge, you're purging out fluids. And so you're depleting fluids. You have to be careful. Does that turn into a depleted fluids equals deficiency yang qi? Does it equal a deficient fluids equals a yang ming? That depends on how person A responds to that. And I've certainly read case studies, and honestly, they are not the most common case studies, so I should give that caveat. But where a doctor actually goes from treating with a Sini Tong, and the person gets better, and then suddenly starts presenting with a like San Huang Sheishin Tong presentation, complete opposite. And that is kind of, I keep that in the back of my mind, that if I haven't mistreated, the key being whatever I've done, they've had some significant improvement despite what happens next. I just have to follow that because people are complex. And it's all based on symptoms and presentation in my mind.
帮我强调了一句，少阴这个太阴病不会转化成阳明病，就是说阳明。
So, Doctor, you wanted to clarify something, which was that part of what we'd mentioned before about Yang Ming and the Tai-Yin relationship, that and also really based on, more importantly, on his clinical experience, is that he's seen lots of cases where Yang Ming disease can then evolve or perhaps devolve into a Tai-Yin disease. He's never seen a Tai-Yin condition turn into a Yang Ming condition. So, you know, that example I raised it a second ago, again, I said it's not a common thing I've seen, but I have seen it, and maybe it happens. In his experience, that does not happen. That Yang Ming, that lesson with that channel in particular and the relationship to its middle chi or Tai-Yin, is that you can overdo these things, these cool herbs, or, as he likes to often say, cold foods or raw foods, and damage the spleen. And that's like a fundamental truth, is that you can overcool your spleen and digestive system, and it tends to head that way. It doesn't head the other way, in which maybe you treat Tai-Yin and then it develops Yang Ming. So that's sort of something he wanted to just emphasize, that that's a sort of fundamental idea. It's like it can go that way. It usually doesn't go the other way.
Well, again, thank you, and let's go to lunch. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.